My dear child, from the very beginning, before names were spoken, before language was formed, before the world even understood what it was searching for, there was a story already being written. A story that would unfold across generations, across moments of faith and failure, across promises and waiting. And at the center of that story was not just a name, but a revelation. Because the names of God were never just titles. They were not labels created by man to describe something distant. They were moments, encounters, experiences where people came to face with a part of God they had never understood before. And in those moments, they gave him a name, not to define him completely, but to capture what they had seen, what they had felt, what had been revealed to them. And my dear child, every one of those names carries a piece of a greater picture, a picture that was never fully complete in one moment, because God did not reveal himself at once. He revealed himself slowly, intentionally, through time, through need, through relationship. The first time humanity truly began to understand him, he was known as Elohim, the Creator, the one who spoke and everything came into existence, not through effort, not through struggle, but through authority, through power. And in that name, you see the beginning of everything, a reminder that nothing you see is random, nothing is without purpose. But creation alone was not the full story, because after creating, God did something deeper. He formed relationship, and that is where another name was revealed, Yahweh, the personal name, the name that was not just about power, but about presence, about closeness, about a God who was not distant, but near, a God who did not just create and leave, but stayed. And my dear child, this is where the story begins to unfold, because as people walked through life, through struggles, through uncertainty, they began to experience God in different ways, and each experience revealed something new. There was a moment when someone stood in fear, unsure of what was ahead, and in that moment God revealed himself as Yahweh Jireh, the provider, the one who sees the need before it is spoken, the one who prepares what you cannot yet see. And then there were moments of brokenness, moments of pain, moments where healing felt impossible, and in those moments he was known as Yahweh Rapha, the healer, not just of the body, but of the heart, of the soul, of the places no one else could reach. And there were battles, moments where strength was not enough, where fear felt stronger than faith. And in those moments, he was revealed as Yahweh Nissi, the banner, the victory that stands over you even when you feel weak. And my dear child, each name revealed something real, something personal, something experienced, but none of them were the full picture, because the story was still unfolding. Because all along, every name was pointing to something greater, something that had not yet been fully revealed. You see, when God was called provider, healer, protector, it was not just for that moment. It was a glimpse, a shadow, a preview of something that was still to come. Because one day, all of those names would no longer be separate revelations. They would come together in one person, in one life, in one presence. And that is where the story leads. Because the same God who created, who provided, who healed, who protected, did not remain distant. He stepped into the story, not as a concept, not as a voice from afar, but as a person. And my dear child, this is what many people miss. The names were never the destination, they were the path, each one revealing a part, each one pointing forward, each one preparing the way.
because the story was never just about understanding God through different names. It was about recognizing Him when He finally stood in front of them. And even then, many did not see it, because they were looking for the names, but not the fulfillment. They knew Him as provider, but did not recognize provision standing before them. They knew Him as healer, but did not recognize healing walking among them. They knew Him as protector, but did not recognize salvation when it came. And my dear child, this is where everything begins to connect, because every name, every moment, every revelation was never separate. It was leading to one truth, one identity, one story. A story that was never just about what God does, but about who He is. And that story, from the very beginning, was always pointing to Jesus, not as something new, but as the fulfillment of everything that had already been revealed. And this is only the beginning, because the deeper you go, the more you will begin to see that every name you thought was separate was always part of the same story, a story that has been unfolding all along, waiting for you to see it, waiting for you to understand it, not just with your mind, but with your heart.
My dear child, as you begin to see how each name of God reveals something deeper, you must also understand this. These names were not random. They were not separate identities. They were pieces of one unfolding truth, each one revealing a part of God's nature that humanity needed at that moment. But none of them were ever meant to stand alone. Because when people experienced God as Yahweh Jireh, they saw Him as provider, but they only saw provision for that moment. When they experienced Him as Yahweh Rapha, they saw healing, but only in the situation they were facing. When they saw Him as Yahweh Nissi, they saw victory, but only in the battle in front of them. And my dear child, this is where the deeper meaning begins, because each of these names was not just about what God was doing, it was about who He would fully reveal Himself to be. You see, provision was not just about meeting needs, it was pointing to a greater provision that would come, a provision that would not just sustain life for a moment, but restore life completely. Healing was not just about the body, it was pointing to a deeper healing, one that would reach the soul, the broken places, the unseen wounds. Victory was not just about winning battles, it was pointing to a final victory, one that would overcome everything that stood against humanity. And all of these, every single one, was leading to one fulfillment. Because there came a moment when the story was no longer told through symbols, through moments, through temporary experiences, but through a person. And that is where everything changes. Because when Jesus came, He did not introduce something new. He revealed what had always been there. He was not separate from the names. He was the fulfillment of them. When He stood before people, He did not just speak about provision, He became it, feeding those who had nothing, showing that what God provides is not limited. He did not just speak about healing, He embodied it, restoring sight, restoring strength, restoring lives, but more than that, restoring hope. And my dear child, this is what many people did not understand. They were expecting something different, something distant, something powerful in a way they could control. But instead, God revealed Himself in a way that was close, personal, relational. Not just a name to be spoken, but a presence to be known. And this is why so many missed it, because they were looking for the names they had learned, but they did not recognize the person those names were pointing to.
They knew God as provider, but did not see provision standing in front of them. They knew him as healer, but did not recognize healing when it touched their lives. They knew him as protector, but did not understand the kind of salvation that was being offered. And my dear child, this is not just a story from the past. This is something that still happens. Because even now, people look for signs, for answers, for experiences, without realizing that everything they are searching for has already been revealed. They search for peace, not realizing peace has already been given. They search for direction, not realizing guidance has already been shown. They search for purpose, not realizing it has already been placed within them. And this is where your understanding must deepen, because the names of God were never meant to be separate pieces you hold on to individually. They were meant to lead you into a complete understanding. An understanding that everything you need, everything you seek, everything you question is not found in separate moments, but in one complete truth. And that truth is not just something to learn, it is something to recognize. Because when you begin to see that every name, every revelation, every moment was always pointing to Jesus, everything begins to connect. You stop seeing God as distant and begin to see him as present. You stop seeing him as limited to certain moments and begin to see him in everything. And my dear child, this is where the story becomes personal. Because it is not just about what was revealed then, it is about what is being revealed to you now. The same God who was known as Creator is still creating. The same God who was known as Provider is still providing. The same God who was known as Healer is still restoring. But now you are not seeing him through separate names, you are seeing him through the fullness of who he is. And this is only the beginning, because the more you understand this, the more you will begin to see that this story was never just something written in the past. It is something that continues, something that is still unfolding. And the more you open your heart to it, the more you will realize that every name you have ever heard was never separate. It was always part of one story, one truth, one identity. A story that was always and will always be about Jesus.